Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and today we're having a mid-month metal session where we're going to cover the class of 1986. There were three thrash masterpieces: Megadeth, Peace Sells, but who's buying? Metallica, Master of Puppets, and not to forget Slayer, Rain in Blood. And I've handpicked a crew of panel experts basically to assess these three albums, tell me who was their favorite album, their first memory of these bands and this album, and give a rating out of 10. So this is going to be a very maybe controversial or maybe a very hard one to select. So I'm going to start off with you, John Clauser. John Clauser is on the Contrarians. He's got a web show called My Music Corner. Check it out. Pitch hitter, John, start it off. Tell me what you think.
Okay. So of these three bands, I think the first one, my memory's a little fuzzy, but I think I may have heard Slayer first, then Metallica, and then eventually Megadeth. So I think that was the order I heard them in. With Slayer, I first heard Live Undead. So that was my first recollection. And at first I was like, no, I'm just not getting this. Took a few lessons, but then I'm like, okay, no, I get this. This is awesome. I eventually heard Metallica's Ride the Lightning. And I think this was actually my introduction to when I actually heard Megadeth. I don't think I never picked up Killing Is My Business for whatever reason. So in the order in which they came in, Metallica's Master of Puppets first. Just a fantastic album from start to finish. Picked up right where Ride the Lightning left off. I've gone to me those two albums are, you could throw them up in the air, whichever lands first is my favorite of the two, and that could change any day because I love both of them pretty much equally. I think Master of Going the longer songs and very proggy metal sounding with just these intense riffs, but then you have these slower songs like Welcome Home Sanitarium, even that sludgy thing that should not be riff. But then you have this Full Speed Ahead of Battery and Disposable Heroes. And of course, Master of Puppets, you have all the different changes that goes on in that song. You have the amazing Orion, awesome instrumental. To me, that's actually what I like that much more than I like Call of the Cthulhu. That I will say. I actually kind of skipped when Creeping Death ends, that's what I cut Ride the Lightning off. But and then of course Damage Incorporated. I was just listening to that right before I clicked on here. Brutal. I absolutely love that song. Always have, always will. Just again, Full Speed Ahead. Just amazing song. So that one I probably do give a 10 out of 10. With Megadeth, no. Megadeth, I think was what I heard. I may have heard next. So again, very strong album with Dave and Chris Poland just going at it on the guitar with this just ridiculous riffs. Same with Dave Ellison, just he's right there with him. And then you have this machine gun drumming of Garth Samuelson. Whew, I just forgot just how good this thing was sometimes. The only song though on this that I tend to skip is I Ain't Superstitious. See, probably the only downer for me on this album. I just don't really care for that. But my God, my last words, love that song. Wake Up Dead, brilliant. Just all the changes, all these great riffs. The Conjuring again with that machine gun drumming and riffing. Of course, everybody knows Peace Sells as soon as the bass hits off. Devil's Island, another great track. To me, this was another album that just wore my ears out in 1986. But because I was never a big fan of I Ain't Superstitious, I'm probably going to only give this a 9 out of 10. But I Ain't Superstitious is the only thing that kills it. Amazing album. I really was only on the Megadeth train though until So Far So Good So What. And then I kind of got off the Megadeth train for a while, only to pick it back up later. One of these days I'll pick back up on the rest of the catalog. Slayer, Rain in Blood. So I mentioned earlier that my first encounter with Slayer was Live Undead. And it took me a few listens before I really liked it. Then I was like, I was hooked. Then Hell Awaits came out. Love Hell Awaits. I don't care. The production is sloppy. It's raw, but it is just, I love that album. Still love this. Still love listening to it. Maybe a couple tracks have kind of worn thin for me a little bit, but I just love that raw energy of that album. So when Rain and Blood comes out, I looked at the cassette. I was like, oh man, this is going to be a nice long cassette. And then I realized, oh, all 10 songs are on both sides. Oh, this is so short. But again, you just get introduced with this ridiculous fast. I mean, just full speed ahead. This album hardly slows down. You got Dave Lombardo just going nuts on the bass kit. You got Tom Araya screaming like a banshee to start Angel of Death. I haven't listened to the album in a long time, and I was in the car earlier and I was like, modulistic terror, a vastistic feast. The only way to exit is going piece by piece. And I don't have a thing in front of me. I can actually still remember because I listened to that album so many times back in 86. It's probably the one album though that's grown up the least for me. I'm not so crazy about Reborn and Epidemic. Piece by Piece is okay. Necrophobic is good, but it's just so much of it is so fast, and it's groundbreaking because it really introduced, because nobody was really doing that full speed ahead at that time, and it really just introduced a whole plethora of all kinds of stuff that would come. But I wish I still had a single that they'd released, because they had a remix of Criminally Insane that what they did with it is they had Postmortem, and then as the song fades out, normally it goes into Rain and Blood, but instead it goes into that where you're hearing all that stuff in the background, you hear the siren, the cymbals, and they goes to and I just thought it was the way they mixed that together. I thought that was perfect. Wish I could find that again, but anyway. So it's a classic album. Don't get me wrong. I listened to all three of these albums so much in 1986 and 87. But for me, I'm gonna give Rain and Blood actually an 8 out of 10, just because it's way too short, and it's just, to me, it just hasn't grown up as good as Master and Pat and P Cells have. The thing I want to mention about P Cells is I think Dave brings in a lot of that punk energy into that thrashy stuff he took from Metallica, whereas it was with Slayer is just full speed ahead, punk, thrash, whatever you want to call it. But with Megadeth, I just thought it was you had that anger in Dave Mustaine's voice, which gives it that strong punk element. But the riffs, man, it was just a battle between that and Master of Puppets. But yeah, all three albums, tremendous riffage, tremendous guitar playing, tremendous instrumentation. Again, it's so ingrained into the DNA. But yeah, that's how I would go. 10 out of 10 for Master, 9 out of 10 for P Cells, 8 out of 10 for Rain and Blood.
Well done. Thanks, John.
Yep.
Peter Wicks. Peter Wicks has got a great website called Wixie Leaks. Check it out. Peter's a bit of a fan from the day, so an old mate. So, Peter, what do you reckon about these three albums, mate?
Yeah, I love all three of them, obviously. I'd rate them an 8 and 9 out of 10, and you'll probably be surprised with the order. 8 out of 10, I'd probably go with the Megadeth. Love the album. It's obviously, if it gets an 8 out of 10, and it's a freaking awesome album. One thing that Dave Mustaine brought that the other bands didn't have at the time was a sense of humour. He actually injected some humour into his lyrics. At the time, it was all cock rock and or death metal, so it was all about killing someone or screwing someone, basically. Dave brought in a new, had a different outlook to most. You can probably pick that most on the title track to the PSL's album. 9 out of 10, I'd go with Slayer. And one thing that I don't know if anybody else has thought of it, but one other thing that's remarkable about the Slayer album, it was kind of like their rebirth, if you like, and they didn't change direction, but it created the sound that they carried on for the rest of their days. But it was also the birth of Rick Rubin. It came of age for Rick Rubin, who that year also produced Raising Hell by Run DMC and License to Ill, which actually had Kerry King as a guest guitarist on it. So hell of a big year for Rick Rubin, 86. But yeah, Slayer, the first time I heard them was, I think it was probably going to the metal gigs that we used to go to. And the guy that used to play the records there, he was always hassled to death to play Slayer. And he played Hella Waits. And so that used to be on every night when we went to the gigs. And I got into it that way. And from there, I ended up, you go backwards, you go back to, Show No Mercy and whatnot. And yeah, when Rain and Blood came out, it was a totally new direction. And I think the thing that hooked it for me was they could go at 100 mile an hour, but when they slowed down, they just sounded so bloody heavy, and no one else sounded that heavy at that time. And the only band you could compare their heaviness to, if you like, was Sabbath. Like nobody else, like when Sabbath struck out the chords, it just sounded like, the dead were going to come out of the graves. Slayer had the same feel. Like no one else had managed to get that, and they've stuck with it ever since. The 10 out of 10, Master of Puppets. You're probably surprised by that because I don't have Metallica tattooed on my arm, but that's the one that introduced metal to so many people, and it's just one of those classic albums. So to the guys in the States, that over here when Master of Puppets came out, it was only available on import, and it sold bucket loads, and they just couldn't keep up with the imports. So that Metallica eventually went to a major label for distribution in Australia. But I remember when And Justice for All came out, that didn't really go anywhere because they weren't sure how many to press. So they ran out like instantly. As soon as it was pressed, it sold off the shelves. So they didn't press enough for it to chart. But that was because when Master of Puppets came out, everybody already had it before the major label got their hand on it. Like everyone was ever going to buy it. But yeah, classic. The other thing I wonder about the Metallica album is if it came out today, would it be classed as prog rock?
Interesting.
When you consider that Tool's considered prog rock, and I'd see Master of Puppets as a precursor to what Tool are doing these days. So yeah, and obviously sad that was the last we got to hear of Cliff Burton as well. So
yeah, absolutely. And the band was changed forever in some aspects, isn't it? Because Cliff Burton, I'll talk more about that, was definitely an integral part of that early sound. Yeah,
well, when you consider like the two instrumental tracks off that and Ride the Lightning were both his and as an album, I prefer Ride the Lightning to Master of Puppets, but I don't know why. I can't really put my finger on why, but I think because For Whom the Bell Tolls in particular was the first time that from a metal band or a big metal band, we'd heard that sort of song construction before with the changing beats, off time drumming. Yeah, that was. I remember hearing that for the first time, just going, Jesus, that is friggin' awesome. So
yeah.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, mate. Well done.
All right.
All right. Aaron Mother Alamare. Welcome, mate. Welcome to the channel. And he's got a fantastic channel. Check it out. Part of the vinyl community. So, yeah, tell us about these 3 albums and your thoughts on it.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. And, I was born in 1970, so I was 16 when these came out, right at the prime time for listening. That was the perfect time for these to come out. And I discovered, I was into heavy metal, hard rock, but a little of the mellower stuff. And then there was a thing called Columbia House Records where you buy 10 records for a penny, and then they send you one a month. And my first month, the album of the month was Megadeth, Peace Sells, But Who's Buying? That's how I got it on cassette. And it just totally blew me away, and it opened me up into the world of the thrash scene and all that. And so that was my first foray into the heavier part of metal, and it changed me forever. And so after I heard that, I started digging in, and then I heard some Ride the Lightning. I didn't hear Master of Puppets till a little later. I heard Ride the Lightning next and was instantly loved that. And then Kill 'Em All I became addicted to. Those are my favorite Metallica's actually. And Master's really close. All three are real close to me. And then I was working, and some people were playing Slayer while I was working on a break. And that's how I first discovered Slayer. And for me, I was more into Megadeth and Metallica than Slayer back then. I've grown to like Slayer more as the years have gone on. And I saw them live, and that's what totally blew me away. So that's what really got me into them. But for me, I'd have to say that this is coming third for me. Rain in Blood's a great album, and Angel of Death, that breakdown they have in that, one of my favorite parts of any Slayer song. Love the breakdown in Angel of Death, and all the way to Rain in Blood. It's an amazing album the whole way through, of course, and it is kind of quick, but I always thought the lyrics. I'm not really into the Christian or the satanic lyrics, and they throw a little of that in. It almost seems a little fake to me at times when they do that. Back then it wasn't, but it didn't. But now it kind of seems like that, and that's kind of where I put it down a little lower. And it's just all, like you said, it's all just one speed the whole way through, which is really cool. But sometimes I like the tempo changes a lot, and so I'd have to rate Slayer, Rain and Blood probably 8.5, 8.5. But I really love it. And then next up, actually my second is going to be Master of Puppets, which I absolutely love. Leper Messiah was always one of my very favorite songs. Love Leper Messiah. Dave Mustaine had a hand in the songwriting. And the thing that should not be is probably my favorite song on here. I always call that the ultimate headbanging song. When I was younger and that was on, you could go right to the whole song the whole way. It was just perfect for headbanging. And I used to do that a lot. And, just every song is amazing on here, of course, just like you were saying. The tempo changes, the start of prog metal kind of the prog thrash, as you would call it. And I'd give that a 9.5, maybe even a 10. And then for this one, I'd give a 10. It's maybe my favorite thrash album of all time. I absolutely love it. Wake Up Dead, first time I heard that, or had that singing, and then all those changes, and then no singing, all of a sudden it comes back at the end. It was really, never really heard anything quite like that. And I just absolutely loved it. And, every song is amazing. I even love Ain't Superstitious because, that actually got me into, it was a Willie Dixon song. So that actually got me into blues music, which I didn't really listen to blues. And I heard that and I was like, oh, who's Willie Dixon? And I discovered blues music through Megadeth, which is really odd. And so I really liked that, he changed the lyrics a bit in it. It kind of had that sense of humor you're talking about. And, but, Good Morning Black Friday, I think, is a masterpiece of a song. Maybe my favorite on here. Absolutely love it. That and Wake Up Dead. But I'll give this a 10 out of a 10 just because of the memories. It's the first thing I heard of thrash. And I actually was into Megadeth, and then Anthrax were my two back then that were my favorites. And Death Angel, all these bands. But they're just all amazing records. And to me, I don't think this one quite gets the love that the Master of Puppets does. But Master of Puppets, of course, one of the best records ever too. So I love them all. But I'm going to go with Megadeth, Metallica, and then Slayer as my ranking on it.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, we've got a bit of variety of opinions. It's not going the way I expect it to be. So that's all part of the fun. All right, let's go to Pete. Peter Jones, what have you got?
Well, thank you for having me.
No problem.
I come at this a little bit differently. I was 24 when these came out, and I had already long established the bands that I liked and the styles that I like. And at this point, I was already starting to play pretty much on a nightly basis out in clubs. And we always found the new bands and the new albums when they came out. We'd give them a listen. But honestly, I was not a fan of any of these bands at the time they came out. I let them ride. I just let them go. I heard what came on MTV or what another friend would play or something else. So I went back to these much, much later and started over and came at it from a completely different mindset because they weren't released at the time. I had a time to move on. Other things had come out and had a little different perspective on them. And so when I look at these three bands, I think it's important to distinguish that while they were all released at pretty much the same time, obviously within the same year, these were three very different bands. They had completely different styles, completely different objectives. And one of the things I want to look at first is what came out before it, because I think that's important because how things fit into timelines matter. So from my experience, when I hear people say, well, these are the debuts of thrash and that kind of thing, I'm like, maybe not so fast, folks. You know, there was this little band, Motorhead, they'd been out for quite a while. And, you know, Accept released Breaker in 81, 83's got Restless and Wild, Fast as a Shark, about as thrash as it gets. And an enormous influence for sure on Metallica. And even in 86, the month before Puppets came out, King Diamond released Fatal Portrait. And I think that is, while it's a little more proggy, is definitely as heavy and as thrashy, but from a production and sound standpoint was pretty light years ahead of all three of these records. So keeping that in mind. So let's take a look at these three. And I'm going to just kind of make some comparisons between the three of them and then draw a conclusion. I will be honest that I am not as familiar with their whole catalogs, so ranking them might not be a fair thing for me because I don't have enough things to base them against in their other catalog. I do know other records, but I will compare them between the three of them, i.e. the battle that we're having today, and we'll rank them that way. So I kind of broke it down differently. So I kind of put them into categories and said, of these bands, which of these categories, who did I prefer? Singers, I prefer James. And I think Hetfield is the secret weapon for Metallica. He is the element that makes them accessible. He is the element that allows them to stay as popular as long as they have. He is by far the least, I don't want to say offensive, but altering and harder to get into than Dave and Tom. And that does make a difference. I mentioned King Diamond. There's people who won't listen to him because they don't like his voice. Except Udo had a very distinct and different kind of aggressive voice, which may have curtailed their popularity moving forward, even though they're musically, they were very, very strong and exceptionally tight with really great material. So James is the guy. You, from my opinion, you could have replaced the other three guys with absolutely anybody. If you've got James, you've got Metallica. It would work for me in any level whatsoever. And I think that stands true to me from now and is where they are now. For drumming, you know, all of these guys are great. And as Peter said earlier, I am a drummer. All of these guys offered something. Dave Lombardo was setting the bar at the time. His speed with his feet and his ability to just unrelentlessly just chug like a freight train whose ass is on fire was the bar. Everybody was trying to keep up with Dave. But that's not to dismiss what Gar was doing. And if we look over Metallica's career, holy smokes, they bring in Nick Menza. There's no drop off there whatsoever. Nick was a stellar player. And when you get to Kenny and all the other players, and even, you know, the players moving forward, every drummer that's been in Megadeth has been spectacular. Very tight, very clean, very fast player. And we have Lars, and it's easy to take pot shots. And I've always believed that there's not better or best, or it's just preference or non-preference. I don't prefer his drumming. I don't find it very stylistically or creatively enjoyable. And ironically, my favorite Metallica performance, and this may sound harsh, but it's honest, is the time he was ill and Joey Jordison sat in with him. That's my favorite Metallica performance, because that's, to me, is what I wished Metallica could sound like with a drummer of Joey's quality. So maybe that was harsh, but again, it was honest. If I look at the lead guitar playing, to me, Dave from Megadeth runs away with this. His playing is just spectacular. Not only just a great lead player, he is in that singular category where there's not a lot of guys who are such phenomenal rhythm players who are also exceptional lead players. And Dave is one of them. And, you know, you get into the bands that have single guitars. Iommi, great rhythm player, spectacular lead player. Blackmore, Van Halen, you can go on and on and on. And Dave has those qualities within the style that he plays that he can go back and forth just as easily, and it's just spectacular. I like Kerr's playing with Slayer. I think it's solid. I am not as big a fan of Kirk's, and most of the time his are pretty unmemorable to me. If we're looking at the production of the three records, all three of these have issues. They're not of the highest audio quality, certainly compared to albums moving forward, and even compared, which is why I brought up the other ones before it, they weren't even as strong as some of those. I think the King Diamond record is far better sounding and much more pleasant listen. I think the songs overall, I prefer from the Megadeth. I like the creativity. I like the changes. I like the slight progressiveness to it. There's a strong distinction from one song to the next, and you don't get a sense that it's kind of this droning of composition from one to the next. Now, if that works, and for Slayer, it does work because they are as authentic to themselves as almost any band that we've ever heard. And Peter was right. They got to a point, and that's pretty much who they were the rest of their career. The AC/DC of thrash, if you will, where the fans knew what to expect, they delivered it, and they were happy with it. Metallica went all over the map. We know their story of them. And Megadeth progressed and got better and tighter, and the songwriting got better. And I think being in the shadow of Metallica can't be easy, but they certainly rose to the challenge. And I've always said this on other channels, sales are not a referendum on quality. They're a referendum on popularity. They are not mutually exclusive. And, Metallica always sold more records. There's just no question about that. So from that standpoint, that question is just so moot. It's not even funny. They just killed the other two bands sales-wise. But if I'm looking at it from an overall tightness as well, I listen to how the band plays together. Again, I prefer Megadeth. I've always liked, especially live, how tight they are, how well rehearsed they seem to be, and how they deliver such precision and musical tightness. And as a musician, I really appreciate that. Obviously, we talked about the lengths of them. Metallica is going to win on that one. The Slayer isn't even as long as some of the Dream Theater songs. So, that tells you that's not such a great thing. But the other thing I want to look at is the misconception that faster means heavier. That's not true. You can actually get to a point where faster is just faster. You lose something in the translation. And again, you pointed out a great thing to consider. They would go frantic, and as soon as they would go back down into a halftime, you would refresh your ears, and all of a sudden they sound like they're crushing the earth. That buildings are falling over around them. They're so heavy. And there is a tempo range that you can get into and still be really, really heavy. So from that standpoint, I'm going to rank the three of these. Peace Sells is my favorite. It's my third favorite of the Megadeth. I do prefer Rust and Countdown over that. Master of Puppets would be second, and the Slayer, Rain in Blood, would be third for me. So how they rank in their overall category, their catalogs, again, I don't feel qualified to be able to give them a number within those. But they're three very strong records. If this is the type of music that you like, they're must-haves, and you need to go and own them if you're a fan of thrash. So.
Well done, Peter. Very thorough. And again, this conversation is not going the way I expected. It's going in all different directions, but it's good. Yeah, thank you for your analysis. I think I'll inject myself into the conversation. So starting off with this Megadeth Peace Sells, But Who's Buying? This was my favorite out of the three for a considerable period of time. And out of the three albums, the opening track's a killer. There's no denying, it's like pow, you know, straight into it. And this one, Wake Up Dead, is just fantastic. There's all the time changes and that little bit where it's just full on speed, and you've got Gar Samuelson on the drums. It's just, it's powerful. And that was always my favorite track on this album. I keep on going back to it again and again and again. Peace Sells is a great song. All of the songs are high quality. I Ain't Superstitious. I agree with you, JC. I don't think it's probably the weak one. Megadeth have this tendency to do covers and not so well. And I think that's the weak on the album. But it's a solid album. I'd give it about an 8 or an 8.5 out of 10. But in the day, I really rated this more highly than Metallica, not as highly as Slayer. And because I guess it was just the inventiveness, the time changes and the musicianship, it's really of a high quality. But yeah, I'd give that about an 8.5. This one, it's a masterpiece. It's a 10 out of 10. So this is Metallica's greatest album. So they were doing the build-up between Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning, and this album. Now, Metallica, how I first got into Metallica, in Australia, we were starved of heavy rock, weren't we, Peter?
Absolutely.
There was nothing. We would hear The Angels or Angel City. We would hear AC/DC. We'd get all these little novelty songs, like Twisted Sister, We're Not Gonna Take It. It was just barren. And there was this show on Triple M, which is a commercial radio station, called The Midnight Metal Shop. And I used to tape it at midnight. And one of the songs they played was Hit the Lights. And I heard this and I go, what the hell is this? This is just excellent. So I went down a rabbit hole and explored the Metallica catalog, which was, a couple of EPs and, that Kill 'Em All album. It's great. The production, it's garagey, but it's raw, it's punky. And it just led me on this journey with Metallica. This album is a summary of that band, the original lineup, and I think it just encapsulates everything that I like about Metallica. It's dangerous, it's punky, it's got a bit of prog. The production is fantastic, the musicianship is great. Master of Puppets is such a fantastic song. It towers over the whole album. And just the way the time signature changes, and even the humor where James Hetfield, before the lead break, and he yells out pancakes. Did you guys know that? I always thought it was like Take Me Away, but it actually, when he's yelling out, it's pancakes. It's a bit of an in-joke with Metallica. That lead break, it's one of the great lead breaks. It gives a shiver up my spine when James Hetfield, not the other guy, but James Hetfield is got the best. He's the most valuable player on this album. And on that particular song, that's just killer. Welcome Home Sanitarium, it was basically written loosely based on One Who Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Leper Messiah, Orion. you know, you can see all their influences are just sort of distilled, you know, the Sabbath, the Misfits. It's just a whole potpourri. And also, I love Cliff Burton. I don't think they were the same after Cliff Burton passed on. Hate to say it. And I think he was the missing link, because they're very strong. The personalities in this band is you've got two alpha males. You've got Hetfield and you've got Lars. Kirk is sort of on the side, but I would imagine Cliff Burton would be the ones that, you know, if those two, the two alpha males were just at it, he'd just go in and go, come on, knuckleheads, let's get down to business and keep it real. He was like authentic, and he was the real part of that band. And I think when he left, they were never the same, because they always had that sort of imbalance in the band personality wise. You know, it was always the new bass player. And I don't think there was any bass on Injustice for All, is there?
Not to speak of.
Not audibly, no.
No. I mean,
which is a shame, because Jason Newsted was a beast on that first Flotsam and Jetsam album.
But it's disrespectful, because he's a fine bass player, and all this wishy-washy excuses why there's no bass on Justice for All, it just doesn't hold up. But look, in summary, this is a great album. They are a great band. They are at the peak of their powers. It's their masterpiece. It's a 10 out of 10 album. I don't give 10 out of 10 that often, but it is. And that's one of my favorites. But that's not the only album I need to praise in this little session. It's this beauty too. And this guy was responsible, Peter Wicks. So I used to go to these bands, and he's getting guilty as charged, going to these concerts and hearing Slayer. And I got this in the day on the original Def Jam label. And I don't know, Aaron, you're in the vinyl community. This is worth a bit of coin, isn't it, these days, to get a first pressing of the Def Jam? And
I'm glad I kept that one then.
Yeah. I think it's the greatest heavy metal album of all time. I think it's one of the greatest heavy metal albums of all time, bar none. I think it's one of the great rock albums of all time, bar none. It is a masterpiece. Now, Slayer, those earlier albums sounded very garagey. The production was cheap. It was of that sort of what you would expect from a Metal Blade album, because it didn't have the budget. But they got into Def Jam. They had Rick Rubin as the producer, and what he did, and I disagree with you a little bit, Peter Jones. I think that the production is great, because I was listening to this a few times, and you can actually, for a Thrash album, hear the separation between the instruments. It's just monumental. And, you know, what bands in those days are talking about politics, religion, sort of the apocalypse. It's, you know, all of these bands, their lyrical content was taken a notch above just the normal party all the time type of stuff that was going in the 80s, and lifted it. And a lot of those, you know, guys that were into your Iron Maidens and Judas Priest, this was the sugar hit that they needed. This was the thing that brought metal into the next decade for many years to come. But this Slayer album, I think it's a masterpiece. It only goes for 28 minutes. It's direct. To the point. And like that last song, Rain and Blood, that is one of the greatest metal closers of all time. And my record, On the Inner Groove, it you know, if you don't lift the needle, the inner groove is actually a thunderstorm. So if you fall asleep, you're just going to be waking up the neighbors with a continual thunderstorm. It's amazing. But I just think from start to finish, lyrically, performance-wise, it's just an amazing piece of work. And Rick Rubin's production lifted them from a garage metal band into the stratosphere. And I don't think they have ever recaptured that. And I agree with some of you that have said that they've tried to capture it, but they haven't. So I give it a 10 out of 10. I don't do that. I've done 2 albums that are 10 out of 10, and I give those 2 a 10 out of 10. I don't think it's just important as a metal album, but as a piece of recorded music. It's a 10 out of 10 album for me.
Wow.
Well, there you go.
High praise indeed.
Reed.
Okay.
Close the show.
Bring us up. Bring it on.
I'm pretty sure Peter left me for last. By the way, 3 Peters on a single show. Is that some sort of record? Peter left me for last because I hate Slayer. And I mentioned that when we started, when he proposed this idea, I was like, look, dude, I don't like Slayer like at all. I hated them in 1986. I hated them in 1990 and 1995 and 2000. I have never grown to like them. They are one of my least favorite metal bands. But let me break this down for then and now. In 1986, I was a pretty stereotypical heavy metal fan. I was listening to Iron Maiden. I was listening to Judas Priest. I was not stereotypical in that I was still listening to Black Sabbath. And if you were a teenager in the 80s, I'm sorry, people my age did not listen to Black Sabbath. I used to get crap all the time from other kids in high school going, why are you listening to that old hippie music? That didn't become popular again for a long time. Tony Iommi used to be voted worst guitar player in heavy metal in Guitar Player magazines in the 80s, which I never agreed with because I love Tony Iommi. But nonetheless, Black Sabbath was not popular in the 80s. I loved them. But at the same time, you're listening to Accept. Savatage had Sirens out. Just lots and lots of great albums. I was in a very small town in Montana, and I was only exposed to new music two ways. One was I had a friend who used to drive to Billings, which was 2.5 hours away, and he would just go to a record store and literally just ask the guy who ran the store, what's out new? And the guy would say this, 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 and he would buy it all and bring it back and then dub cassettes for all of us. And we would listen to those dubbed cassettes. And the other way was MTV. Slayer had no videos, at least at that point. Metallica famously didn't do a video until one. Megadeth had videos. They had a video for Wake Up Dead, and they had a video for Peace Sells. So that was my introduction to those bands, was the videos for Wake Up Dead and Peace Sells. And they instantly hooked me. Now, as far as I was concerned at the time, Metallica was just one more band. You know, again, I had a dubbed cassette that had Kill 'Em All on one side and Ride the Lightning on the other, and neither of those albums stood out. What stood out of all of the thrash music to me back in the day was just how bad it sounded, not how badly it was played, not how bad the songs were, because it was fantastically played and there were some great songs, but the albums sounded terrible because thrash bands had no money. If you go back and reread the story, or just read for the first time the story of these bands recording their first albums, they were on literal shoestrings, and the guy that they were paying to produce had never produced an album before, and whatever money they would give him, he would go and get high and then come back to the studio and try and record these albums. So they sounded terrible. Compare that to an Accept or a Scorpions or an Iron Maiden or a Dio. Those albums sounded good. So I enjoyed listening to those a lot better. Kill 'Em All, again, Ride the Lightning, they were good, but they were no better to me than Accept or Iron Maiden. And then Master of Puppets came out, and that was a sea change. It was so different from anything else on the market. The songs were very long, they were very complex. I still think that album did not sound particularly good. I don't know if it's been remixed over the years, but at the time, it's really all kind of underwater to me. The sounds, I have lost some bass frequency hearing because of loud music over the years. But that album always sounded very like a low rumble with not a lot of separation. But I loved that album. When I was in 1986, that would easily have been my favorite, not just heavy metal album, but it was my favorite record in 1986. I loved that album. As the years go on, Metallica really lost my loyalty. I liked Injustice. Okay. I actually really enjoy the self-titled album. And after that, I think they fell off a cliff. But even worse, they were the worst live band I ever saw. Not because they couldn't play, but because they had it mixed to where all I could hear was the bass and the drummer. And I'm staring at two guitarists on stage and unable to hear a single note until the guitar solo starts, and then I could hear the guitar. I was like, is this amateur hour? How much did I pay for my ticket for these? And it wasn't just once, it was 3 times. So at that point, I was off the Metallica bandwagon. Megadeth, I've seen in concert 16, 17 times. They are always fantastic. I have never seen them put on less than an amazing show. Dave Mustaine's talent for picking second guitar players is unmatched. The people he has in that band are the best of the best. And Chris Poland was such an unusual guitarist. All of the thrash guys, if you go back to the 80s and ask them who their influences were, it was all the same guys. They were listening to Jimmy Page. They were listening to Michael Schenker. Chris Poland was listening to Carlos Santana. He was a jazz guy, and he brought in a completely different note choice and a completely different phrasing. And part of that, if you've never seen Chris Poland play, I've had the pleasure of seeing him play with his jazz trio, Ohm, several times. His left hand, he broke his index finger, and it sticks out at an angle like this. So he plays most of his guitar with these fingers. And then his index finger is off at this crazy angle, so he can get these literally inhuman stretches on the fretboard that allows him to do things technically that other players are physically incapable of mimicking. It makes him absolutely unique. And I think his playing on Peace Sells is astounding. And I don't think at this point, I mean, clearly all of the guys were honing their craft as lyricists. Dave is still a little raw. His lyrics are a little, you're almost there. By the time he gets to, I think So Far, So Good, So What is really, by that album, he's kind of locked in as a lyricist. And I used to describe his voice as sounding kind of like Snidely Whiplash, but he's got that anger in his voice. He's very passionate and he's pissed off. And that really comes through in the music, right? James Hetfield didn't have that. Now, Hetfield, I never really liked Hetfield singing until the Black Album, because I think he was just kind of shouting until then. And when they did the self-titled or the Black Album, he was finally a singer. He was allowed to sing in a more melodic sort of way over this heavy music. So back then in 1986, it absolutely would have been Master of Puppets, and then Peace Sells, and Slayer's nowhere on the board for me. I don't like Slayer. Have never liked Slayer. The only album they have that I can kind of listen to is Seasons in the Abyss, which I know a lot of people consider that their most commercial album, and maybe that's why I can listen to it. I have seen Slayer live. I'll give them this. Live, I thought I saw him in concert with Slipknot, and they blew Slipknot off the stage. Everybody around me was, when Slipknot got up, they were all going, man, Slayer was so much better than this. They were a great live band, tight, but on record, they are not for me. So I can't even rank them. Now, if we had thrown in Anthrax, Spreading the Disease, or advanced the clock to 1987 and done Among the Living, then we could talk. But for me, this is a 2-horse race. So in 1986, it absolutely would have been Master Puppets as a 10. And then Peace Sells is probably an 8. But it's not 1986 anymore. It's 36 years later. Now, I haven't listened to Master Puppets in decades. I listened to it before doing this and went, oh yeah, that's what I used to like about this show. I listen to Megadeth constantly. I find them consistently more interesting. They change up things more in the songs. I think the musicianship's at a consistently higher level. Dave Mustaine never became a particularly better vocalist, is still the one kind of dig I have against Megadeth, but they rate as one of my top bands. I've seen them live, I said 15, 16 times. I continue to get every Megadeth album that comes out. I stopped buying Metallica music years and years ago. Now, I don't consider Peace Sells to be their best album, but it's a very good album. So these days, I would probably put Peace Sells about an 8.5. And Master of Puppets is going to be about an 8, because I listened to it and went, yeah, this was good, but I didn't want to listen to it again. when I get to the end of Peace Sells, I can just hit play and listen to that whole thing over again.
Well, thank you. I tell you what, it's gone completely different to what I would have expected today. But I think one thing I tried to get with the big four, and unfortunately, Anthrax was 1987. It wasn't in 1986, so I couldn't sort of line it up.
I said 85 and 87. They were on either side of your dates there.
So it was more so the big three. But I think, it seems like Megadeth and Metallica are the winners. Slayer, not as much. But I think we all agree Metallica went off the cliff, maybe, at some point.
No pun
Do we all
intended.
agree that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I got off the train about the time of the, well, probably actually in Injustice for All.
Yeah.
Because after about the fourth or fifth listen, I got bored of it.
Yeah. What do you guys think of their last one, like Hardwire, and they trying to capture that early stuff, but it's still not quite there? What do you think?
Well, it's interesting you brought up Hardwire, because Hardwire was or is the only Metallica record I actually own. And I found it to be very refreshing. I found it to be much more stripped down. I think Lars really had improved from the standpoint that he just went into a pocket. That's all he was doing. He wasn't trying to do anything other than that. He went right into the pocket, and it was some of James's best riffs. It's very heavy record. I think the production's very strong. It's got the sonics on it are outstanding, and it's long. It's too long. 2 CDs. Yeah. I can play the first CD all the way through and enjoy it from that standpoint. And I hadn't gotten into an album from bands in that era in a long, long, long time. But Hardwire was one that brought me to them, and so I do listen to that one, and I enjoy that one quite a bit.
Yeah, Aaron, what do you think of the latest Metallica, or the late Metallica?
I actually enjoy it. I actually think the self-titled is maybe my least. Well, Reload's my least favorite album they did. I liked Load a little. I liked Load. I actually like Saint Anger, which a lot of people hate it, but I actually like it.
That tin drum sound.
I had a whole video on it. Me and Chris Brophy did on Saint Anger, and it's just really raw. It's almost like a garage album. That's why I liked it. But my favorite of their later stuff since Clift is gone is actually Death Magnetic. I like that one a lot. I think that's a great record. Yeah. It's got some of the, like, it almost sounds like it should have came after And Justice for All to me. Yeah. Instead of going to the Black Album, I think Death Magnetic is their strongest album. Sure. After that.
What about you, Pete? Yeah.
I haven't listened to much of their newer stuff, actually. I've got it, but I just don't seem to go back for a repeat listen for some reason. Nothing. To me, the last great thing they did was the video, Some Kind of Monster, which also featured Dave Mustaine. I thought that was a really brave video to put out.
Yeah. I don't know.
I think it's important too that, Pete, when we talk about these 3 bands, because they were very strong staples live. All 3 of these bands, sound issues notwithstanding what Reed experienced. If you watch that Seattle show on the Masters tour, the infamous one, and all the stuff was on, Live Shit Binge and Purge, all those kinds of things. They were a ferocious band live. And I think that really translated, especially for Metallica, into really strong record sales. And a lot of times they say the studio record sales promote the live. I think for them, it was exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
I think they're constant touring, they're constant live performances, and everybody went, okay, I got to go get the record. And you go get the record. It's not to say the records weren't substantial on their own, but like I said before, I'm not a big fan of all 3 of these bands particularly, but I can watch James live all day. He's just a force, and he's so aggressive, and he's so into it, and he's so especially early on, the rage in him was measurable, and it translated. And every kid in the crowd who were a lot younger than I was when this stuff happened were just associating with it and just hooked. They were into it. They related, they associated, and that was one of their appeals. They were just angry.
Yeah.
And
I think this is a really important point, the whole live thing, because at the time, again, MTV was the only distribution system for heavy metal in America. I mean, there were like specialty radio shows like a Metal Shop that would come on for an hour once a week. But other than that, if it wasn't on MTV, it wasn't going to be played on radio anywhere in the country. So people saw it in live performance. And all of these albums did not sell when they came out. They sold later. And, now they're, I don't know how many times platinum Master of Puppets is, but it wasn't a platinum album when it came out. It became platinum after the self-titled album went to be the biggest album of the 90s, and it pulled all of the Metallica catalog up with it. At the time, it was probably doing 50 to 100,000 copies.
Yeah.
Well, I've got to put out this anecdote because I always thought this was hilarious. Watching Headbangers Ball on MTV. It was hosted by Dee Snider. And Dee was announcing they would have concert dates. And he's like, and next up, let's see here. There's a concert from, I've remembered this all these years. Concert from Megadeth? Megadeth? Are you kidding me? Killing's my business, and business is good. He goes, oh, people, you've got to see these guys before they become huge. And then next year, Twisted Sister was gone, and Megadeth has gone on to have a consistent career for the next 40 years. So screw you, Dee Snider.
Love is for suckers. That say no more.
In Australia, it was completely different though. Like Peter, remember, like we didn't see any of these bands live.
No,
like,
we were starved.
Totally starved. We didn't have MTV at the time. We had
Kerrang magazine.
We had magazine. So most of it was just whatever you read in a magazine was supposed to be good. And you could stay up. There was a video show late at night, and if you sat up till 3 a.m, this is pre-Rage, you could see maybe 1 or 2 videos from one of these bands. But like even Motley Crue didn't tour out here until Dr. Feelgood.
Yeah, and Dio was the big one on the Sacred Heart tour with Craig Goldie. We never saw Vivian Campbell.
And you saw the second leg.
Iron Maiden were about the only ones that came out. Iron Maiden used to come out reasonably regularly.
Yeah, Maiden came out, and that's why they've got such a good audience base here. Judas Priest came out like 30 years later, and was there was no fan base.
I think we got Metallica. I think it was
Injustice for All, supported by Mortal Sin.
Yeah.
So they were the days. Any thoughts, John? When did Metallica lose it for you, or you were still a fan all the way through?
For me, with Injustice for All, I can just remember in my car, it was like after it came out, like after about the 4th or 5th listen, I was just like, yeah, I'm bored of this. I just kind of, I kind of tossed it off to the side, and the Black Album came out. I heard Enter Sandman, and I just thought, okay, this is different. And I got the Black Album. I thought it was okay. Did I go back and listen to it much? Not really. I don't think to this day I don't think I've ever listened to Load, Reload. I've heard the Saint Anger. I mean, I've heard the hits from those albums, but I've never listened to Load or Reload. Never listened to Saint Anger. What else is in between there?
The Lou Reed album.
Something? The what? The what? Oh,
Lulu.
Yeah. Well,
Aaron, have you listened to the
No.
Lou Reed album?
I was thinking between Load, Reload, and Saint Anger. I know there's something else in between there, but I can't remember what it was.
The only covers things album. They had in between there were the symphonic album and the covers album.
Okay, that's right. I've never listened to those to this day. I did pick up Death Magnetic. Thought it was good. Did I go back and listen to it a few more times? No. Same with Hardwired. Thought it was good. Did I go back and listen to it? No. I've only seen the band once, and that was on the Hardwired tour in Atlanta. Volbeat and Avenged Sevenfold opened up for him. So that was the first time I ever saw Metallica in concert, and I thought it was a good show. They put on a really great show, so I was glad to actually see him finally. I actually have the CD of the show, because they were you could buy their shows. You know, they record them from the soundboard, and then you can pay $19.99 or whatever it is, and then you can either have it as an MP3 or they'll send you the CD of it. I have a CD of it somewhere. I just don't know where it was. Anyway, I've never seen Slayer live, even though I was a huge fan of Slayer in the late 80s, early 90s. For me, the Punk album kind of lost my interest with them. You know, the Divine Intervention was pretty good, but life kind of dictated a lot of different things for why I got out of Slayer. But South of Heaven and Seasons and probably the Decade of Decadence albums, I was playing those ridiculously amounts of times. Very much ingrained in me, but probably the Punk albums when I think I finally got off the train there. And I have yet to listen to God Hates Us All or Repentless and whatever other Christ Delusion. I don't know the other albums there, but I kind of lost it for them because I heard a lot of them. They're really hit and miss too. You know, they do this new metal sound. They do this really sludgy B tuned stuff, which some people liked, some people didn't. Again, Megadeth was the only I've seen them live. I saw them in 2012. They came here to town. I was supposed to see them on the last tour with Lamb of God and Trivium and In Flames or Soilwork or whatever it is. They were supposed to come here. That was in 2020. Well, we all know what happened in 2020. That didn't happen. And they never rescheduled the show in Alabama. So that tour never came back here. But the one time I did see them live, great show. I've got the catalog. I've listened to a lot of the newer albums. Did I spend a lot of time with them? No. I don't know why. I just need to go back and listen to them. But so there you go.
Well, thanks, guys. That was a really good show. I think we all agree that 1986 was a very special time. These were really great albums, and I think it was a really special time for that sort of music. So thanks for your contribution today. Peter, Aaron, John, and Reed, thank you very much. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Put your comments, tell me what you think, and we'll catch you next time. We'll do this again, guys. This was great.
Sounds good.
All right.